Viva Cristo Rey, Spanish for long live the King. Viva Cristo Rey. This announcement of the kingdom of God, of Christ as our King, very much had its roots not more than 100 years ago in Mexico during the Cristero movement. There was a movie that came out about 10, 15 years ago. I think it was For Greater Glory. I'd like to talk about that today. You see, there was a time, especially when Mexico was very Catholic. Very Catholic. But around 1920, even though Mexico was very Catholic, the government was not. And it's not so much today either. And a man took over the president called Calles, and he was an atheist. He was a Mason. He was a Marxist. And they sought to suppress the church. Now that suppression has been lifted not that long ago. But they sought to suppress the church. And even though that has been kind of let go, it still has some of the inklings and some of the reverberations of that. Up until 1990, a priest wasn't even allowed to walk around with his collar on. It was actually against the law. In 1987, in Mexico, Pope John Paul II visited Mexico City, and the mayor of Mexico City paid his fine on his behalf. But, in some sense, it still exists today. If you go down to Mexico, priests still don't wear their clerics. The tradition is kind of gone. But during those 1920s, there were priests and bishops who were defying the government at their own peril, being thrown out, being put in jail, and executed for doing terrible things like saying the Mass, baptizing people, marrying people, and hearing people's confessions. Because the government wanted to suppress the church, and Marxists like to do this because they want to make the government the church. But to put that aside for just a second. Yesterday, one of the martyrs of that movement celebrated about almost 100 years ago, Father Miguel Pro. We have a picture of him. There's an actual photo taken at his execution. Father Miguel was a Jesuit. He was in and out of Mexico. They were hiding him, moving about, and he had been warned even by his superiors, hide, stay low, stay out of sight, don't wear your collar. I think here he's wearing a tie. But he was in some family's house, and it's a long story. They were hiding, and he was found out. He brought before a firing squad. There's a couple of different stories about what happened in front of that firing squad, but he asked, can I pray? So he kneels down. We have a picture of that too. He kneels down and says a 2-minute prayer, gets up, stretches out his hands like you see here, with a small crucifix in one hand and a rosary in the other, and declares, Viva Cristo Rey. And then the little general said, fire. Now what happens next really depends on who you talk to. Some accounts say he was immediately hit in the chest by 5 bullets because he does rock back and fall down. Others would say that the guy's shooting actually purposely missed him. But he does fall back, but he's still alive. No one knows why. And then someone comes up, one of the other soldiers, and shoots him at point blank range and takes his life. Whatever happened with his body and his voice, he declared to those soldiers and to us, and they took this picture to warn people what will happen if you defy the Marxist, atheist, Masonic government. This is what will happen to you. And still this image is with us, both teaching us, inspiring us, and in some sense shaming us I was reading a little bit about him again yesterday, even reminding us for what, maybe not 1927, but what 2020 was like when we were sneaking around and the government was telling us to shelter in place. You could take that down. But today, as we celebrate the feast day, it's last week of ordinary time, the solemnity of Christ, the King of the universe. I am struck by the gospel. It's not one of Jesus' sermons. It's not one of his great miracles. It's that profound, mysterious, amazing conversation between Jesus and Pontius Pilate. That amazing conversation where the king, you could say, Pontius Pilate, asks Jesus, "Are you a king? Are you the king of the Jews?" Asking good and direct questions. Jesus doesn't answer him straightforward. He kind of dances around it, but says, "I testify to the truth." Also, a fascinating part of this that we don't get to read. If you keep reading, when Jesus says, "Those who live in the truth, hear my voice." And then Pilate asks that all-important question, "Truth? What is that?" And then there's an awkward silence, a pregnant silence, where poor Pontius Pilate has no idea he's talking to truth in the face. He's looking at him in the face. But I think we could argue that Pilate's not a complete jerk. He is smart. He doesn't want violence. He wants peace. But he's also willing to put the people to the test. He figures if I give them a choice to save their king, as opposed to a cheap stand-in or imitation called Barabbas. Bar-Abbas means son of the Father. That surely they would pick the true son of the Father. And they don't, as we know. They made their choice. You could almost say they screamed out, "Viva Barabbas Rey," as they say, freed him. But it gets worse. You could say it was their worst hour when a chapter later, they all scream in unison, "We have no king but Caesar." Wow. Sort of the rock bottom moment here. And it reminds me of, again, that Garden of Eden incident. Well, we could say it's really not just one sin, but maybe even a series of sins. Adam not protecting his wife, giving in a temptation to eat the forbidden fruit. But even then, God comes looking for him. He comes looking for him. And they have a chance to say, "You know what? I messed up. I'm sorry. It was me. I'm sorry." And he asks Adam, "Why did you do this?" And this is sort of Adam's rock bottom moment too. Because he doesn't just blame the woman. He looks and says, "It was this woman who you sent me. It was this woman who you sent me." He blames God for that sin. A rock bottom moment. That's what we call Jesus the new Adam and Mary the new Eve. Because at Jesus' worst moment, there wasn't a lot, but there was a few people who testified that he was their king. The Apostle John and a few ladies who stayed by the cross. They testified with their bodies that he was their king. So today, the both challenge and hopefully inspiring part of the liturgy is to challenge us. Put ourselves to the test. How do we declare Christ as our king? And when do we do it? When do we have that opportunity? And in what ways do we deny that he is our king? In what way? Because we have to admit and profess we have a fundamentally different kind of king. A fundamentally different kind of king. You know, any king, any teacher, coach, president, or someone who's running for office, or even your boss, most of them seek to win your hearts. to win over your hearts to them. Now, we don't begrudge them wanting to win your hearts, but we have a God who gave his heart to us, wants to give us a heart transplant, who literally pulls that off when we are baptized, gives us a heart transplant, but actually physically, substantially, actually gives us his heart in the Eucharist and does the same thing as Miguel Pro, or Miguel Pro does the same as him. Stretch out his arms and say, may you live forever. I love you this much. May you live forever. May you reign with me. A transplanted heart of our King giving himself to us. So, having established that, I think we have to talk right down to earth when the rubber hits the road. One of the times when we deny that Christ is our King, and when time do we affirm him? One of the times that happens around here is around weddings. When people get invited to weddings. Now, you may be invited to, Uncle Nacho's 5th wedding at a bowling alley, and you know that he was once Catholic, and he wants you to come. That's when you can decry and say, no, Christ is my King, and that's not okay, and I'm not going. Now, that's going to cause some problems. It's going to be a pushback. Come on, be cool. Come on, we're family. No, Uncle Nacho, you're a Christian. And Jesus says 4 times you divorce your wife and marry another, you commit adultery, and you're on number 5? I'm not going. Also, I think it kicks in, especially when we're traveling. Like this week, you may have family over, you may be at family, and then Sunday comes around, and it is inconvenient. And you may have to say, can I go to Mass, or we're going to go to Mass. Now, that may cause a ripple in the family. And that's, again, a time when we testify that family is important, but Christ is number 1 in our lives. And it's okay to tell them that every once in a while. To tell your family, I love you all, but I'm not going to hell for none of you. Sometimes we have to say that. And even as a priest, sometimes I am discouraged. And it's easy to give in to laziness. Because, sometimes you might run into a little trouble. We have shared with this congregation on many occasions that we do about once a month go knocking on doors. And I get excited when I walk up to a house and there's a statue of the Virgin Mary. There's a statue of St. Francis. There's a crucifix on the door. Yay, it's a Catholic home. And then they have a sign that says, no soliciting. Now, I've seen signs that, have warnings like knock and run, our dog needs the exercise. Or trespassers will be shot and survivors will be shot again. I've seen those. But here is my challenge to some of you out here right now, where the rubber hits the road. Let's think about this right now. Some of you have no soliciting on your doors. Take them off. Take them off and put another sign up there that says, roofers, solar panel salesmen, Jehovah's Witness Mormons, and Oneness Pentecostals. Please knock. We want to talk. And come to the door just like Blessed Miguel Pro with your rosary and your crucifix and say, are you Catholic? Were you Catholic? Would you like to be Catholic? They're on your front porch. They're in your space. Why wouldn't we let them know who our King is? Because you might be dealing with a person who's scared, who's nervous. Maybe they're hurting. Maybe they've been just rejected 20 times. And they come to your door and it says no soliciting. Or they knock on the door and they hear a mumble from inside, nobody's home. But I think this is our chance. Wow. Get up from the couch, put the remote down, and share your faith with them. Use your body and your mouth to do so whenever we get the chance to proclaim Viva Cristo Rey. Long live Christ, the King.